All right, title this World War I Part 3. All right, we just got done with discussing some of the things of why the U.S. came in. We talked about the unrestricted submarine warfare. We also discussed very briefly how the Russian Revolution knocked the Russians out of the war, and we kind of came in during that period. So now we need to go into what this means for America. Okay, as we know, July 1st, 1914, war gets declared. April 1917, we actually enter the war, and then it's only for a short period of time, but the war is going to end in November of 1918. So we've kind of sat back and watched, but now we're going to really get involved. Okay, and the first thing, obviously, when you get into war, you need an army. And to do this, we pass what's called the Selective Service Act, or as we call it today, the draft. And it'll draft men from 18 to 45. During this period, over 2 million men were drafted. And the draft, we still have the Selective Service Act today. When you guys turn 18, you will have to register for the draft. Luckily for us, so as of right now, we do not have an active draft, but it is there just in case. So you'll have to do that when you turn 18 years old. Now, how are we going to finance the war? You know, that's a big thing. You don't hear about that very often, but you have to pay for this. And obviously, most of it's going to be done through taxes. We're going to sell war bonds. These are bonds where you can, it's actually like a savings bond. Some of you may have some of these savings bonds, or also called Liberty bonds back then. And you can, it's almost like giving the government a loan, and you get something out of that too. And that bond will eventually mature, and you can cash it in, usually for a little bit more money than what you bought it for. But it's basically a loan to the government. Those aren't as popular as they once were, especially in World War I or World War II, but they're still out there. Okay. Rallies, parades, you know, any way that they could raise money, and we'll see a lot of movie stars get involved during this time with that kind of thing. Now, what about our industries? Okay, we need war materials, and our industries are going to do that. So the War Industry Board, the WIB, will be created to watch over this. Okay, and basically they're the dictator to industry. The WIB could order workers to go to different cities, or can make factories switch and make different products. Instead of building cars, they will now build tanks. Daylight savings time. We just did this. We just fell back here in November. Daylight savings time was created to give workers an extra hour of light. So that's where that comes from. The government would come in and take over the entire industries and would basically force those industries to make war materials. Now, I will say this, at the same time, they're going to profit from these things. But it's basically like a dictator to industry, and you don't see that in America very often, and you definitely don't see that anymore, where you don't have to make a company make these military products. But back then, we weren't prepared for that, so the WIB kind of had to come in and force the issue. During this period, over 500,000 African Americans moved from the South to the North to get jobs. Okay, this is actually known as the Great Migration. The Great Migration. 500,000 African Americans moved from the South to the North to get into the war industry jobs, and they did. Okay, we also see, unfortunately, some of that racism follow them from the South, especially the KKK will follow them to the North, and we really see this is pretty much the height of the KKK's power during this time period because of everything that was going on. Women will also go to work by the thousands. and they will jump in and be in the workforce as well. The Creel Committee. This is basically, they're going to be in charge of propaganda. And it gets ugly, okay? They're going to start to persecute the German culture. The Germans were seen as the main enemy of World War I. We obviously have a lot of German people in America during this time period. Many of us, especially from Ohio and things, have some German background. So they begin to persecute not just the Germans, but especially the Germans, but other foreign cultures as well. We'll see immigrants will have to take literacy tests to be allowed to enter. There will be other restrictions to kind of hold that off. And this all has to do with, the fear of war and things like that. Especially this next one, Espionage Act of 1917 and the Sedition Act of 1918. No negative or disloyal acts on government or against the war effort. Okay, you could be fined $10,000 or even get 20 years in prison. 6,000 people will be arrested for espionage and sedition acts, and 1,500 would be convicted. Now, did these things happen? Definitely. Okay, there were definitely German spies here. There were definitely other spies from other countries here, and we were doing the same thing there. But we obviously became paranoid leading into the war, and so we'll pass those espionage and sedition acts to try to combat that. George M. Cohen will write a propaganda music song called Over There. And I think I don't know if this will work. We'll try it. Nope. The song is called Over There. And the words were, over there, send the word to beware, that the Yanks are coming, the drums pumping everywhere. Thank you very much. And that song is basically saying that we are sending our troops over to Europe, we're going to support them, and that was the most popular song of the time period. And there is George M. Cohen. But I will play you that song when we get into class. Unfortunately, it did not work here. Here are some examples of the propaganda posters that you see. Okay, there's a U-boat on there. This is depicting a German soldier piercing an angel with a spear. And then here's one of this is a British one. Here's another German soldier that looks like a baby that he is stabbed with his gun. Or a bayonet, I should say. Another one taking a woman. I can't tell what that is. And then, comparing working people getting ready for the war and things like that. So those are the difference. Here's one of King George V. Britons want you. Okay, join your country's army. So those are some of the things that you're starting to see. Now, let's get into some of the actual action that's going to take place here. Okay, Germany has been planning for this for quite some time. They actually even had a plan called the Schlieffen Plan. And the Schlieffen Plan was basically their plan to avoid a two-front war. That is what you want to avoid most during the time of war, is fighting on two different fronts, because right then and there it splits your army in two. So the plan was to attack France through neutral Belgium, going basically around where the French thought they would come, and sack Paris as soon as possible. They thought that if they could do that, they would kind of keep Britain out of the war, and they would be able to tackle the Western Front, France, and then they could focus all their energy on the Eastern Front, which would be Russia. That was the plan. Okay? And I think I have a picture of this. Let me fast forward here to show you really. There it is. All right, here's the Schlieffen Plan. So the Northern Army of Germany was going to go through here. Here's Belgium, which was a neutral country. They're going to go through and get to Paris. If they can sack Paris, They thought that they could probably keep Britain out, and then they could focus all their energy on the Eastern Front. That's how they were going to avoid a two-front war. Okay, that'll play into future history, so make sure you understand that a two-front war is a bad thing, especially during this time period. So they wanted to avoid fighting on two fronts, so they came up with this Schlieffen plan to do that. Now, as we know, it's not going to work. Okay, they actually will attack Belgium and then go into Paris, or get very close to Paris. And by September, Paris was being threatened. Okay, then we had the First Battle of the Marne. And the Marne River is just outside of Paris, kind of the border. And basically, at this point, the battle, it turns into a huge stalemate. Right? And it turns into a stalemate because of a new weapon called the machine gun. Okay, and it basically, the machine gun, the old way of fighting, of marching in and ready, aim, fire, you can't do that anymore. Now, nobody told the Russians that, because the Russians will continue that, which is why their numbers were so bad. But you can't do that anymore. So this leads to getting pinned down and both sides building trenches, and which leads to trench warfare. The British and French troops basically saved Paris at that battle line, and from here on out, there basically weren't any gains on the Western Front, for a number of years. Basically, from 1915 to 1918, it's just going to halt there. Okay, the war is over about 100 yards of land at that point. The movie All Quiet on the Western Front, depicts this action. There's just nothing going on. Every once in a while, one side will charge another side, and just back and forth. But there really isn't a lot of gain of ground at that point. Once the lines are established, and they call it to the race to the sea, trying to outflank each other all the way up to the English Channel, at that point on, it's basically over that 100 yards of ground. Okay, and here is a picture of what that area between that would be called. There is no man's land. Okay, you'd have one trench here, one trench here. You would have all the craters from the artillery shells in the middle. You would have, unfortunately, loads of dead bodies, sometimes skeletons. They would arrange sometimes to go pick up the dead and wounded, but a lot of times you would just sit there. And also, at this area, a lot of it was right at or even under sea level. So when it rained, those trenches would get flooded, which led to all kinds of problems. The most famous one is called trench foot, where basically your feet would basically rot off. That gross. Rats were a huge problem. Rats would be all over the area, and some of them would be as big as cats. In fact, some people were mistakenly going out to help a wounded soldier, and only to find out that the body was full of rats, which made it look like the body was moving. So they called those corpse rats. So not exactly your best place you wanted to be. I mean, just awful, 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 awful. Some other actions. Okay, there's the machine gun, by the way. Italy. Okay, remember, Italy started out on the side of Germany and Austria-Hungary. When the war broke out, Italy withdrew from the Central Powers. And they actually would go over to the side of the Allies because they were promised more land. Okay, it almost became like free agency in Major League Baseball or basketball or football, where they're going to go to the side of the highest bidder. They're going to choose. There was another country called Bulgaria that did the same thing. They're going to choose the side they think is going to win and that is going to benefit them the most. Okay, and for the Italy, it was the Allies. For Bulgaria, it'll be the Central Powers. The Eastern Front. Okay, Germany invades Russia, and they'll run into a stalemate. Now, there's more movement there, but pretty much the same thing, and mostly because that Russia because they chose to invade or to fight, that Germany now has to split their army. So even though Germany had the strongest army in the world, it wasn't quite strong enough. All right, let's stop there, and we'll continue with World War I next time.